So we are going to go ahead and get started. Before I introduce Dr. Gibbs, who is here with us today, I just want to take a few minutes to thank all of you for taking the time out of your evening to come out and to extend some thanks for the people who have either financially or spatially supported this particular event, as well as the Hayes Holocaust Remembrance events for the past few years. So we have several members of our committee here today. We have Professor Holly Marquis over here, Brian Gribben, who has been part of the committee since the beginning, along with Holly. And we have, I know Sam is, we have Sam with the Hayes Public Library. You should all go visit her there. And we also have some students. We have Riley. And Riley has been on the committee for about a year, and then Sarah, who has been with us for a few years and will be leaving the committee. And we just got a new student roped in, Dylan. He started today. Yeah. So you'll be thanking him next year. And I also want to thank the provost for her generous support of this, as well as the dean of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and the history department chair, all of which who financially supported this event. So it's a pleasure to welcome Chad Gibbs, who's an assistant professor of Jewish Studies at the College of Charleston and the director of the Zucker Goldberg Center for Holocaust Studies. Dr. Gibbs is a historian of the Holocaust whose work focuses on Jewish resistance, gender, and sexuality, and the ways in which memory and space shape our understanding of genocide. Since joining the faculty in 2021, he has taught widely on the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, and comparative genocide, while also leading research initiatives that connect students and the public to difficult histories through innovative methods. Today's talk, Survival at Treblinka, Recovering Lost Stories of Jewish Resistance, reflects this commitment. It explores how individuals imprisoned at Treblinka navigated unimaginable choices and conditions, forged networks of resistance, and in some cases, more than we thought before, survived. By reconstructing these histories, Dr. Gibbs invites us to reconsider what resistance looked like in one of the most extreme environments of the Holocaust, and to recognize the agency and the humanity of those often reduced to statistics and numbers. This lecture is closely tied to his new book, which is hot off the presses, and he's going to talk to you about, Survival at Treblinka, A Geography of Resistance, Sexuality, and Survival, which offers a reinterpretation of life and resistance in the Treblinka death camp. The book combines spatial history with attention to gender and sexuality to show how relationships, identities, and physical spaces shaped both survival strategies and acts of defiance. In doing so, it expands our understanding of resistance beyond armed revolt to include everyday forms of resistance, solidarity, and negotiation underneath extreme oppression. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Chad Gibbs.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you all for coming tonight. I have a special thanks to the Committee for Holocaust Remembrance, to Professor Nickel, Professor Marquis, and Fort Hays State leaders that have come tonight. Thank you all really for being here and for making this possible. It's really fantastic to be here. This is the third time I've given a talk on this book that came out officially April 21st. It's the third time, but the first two were really just practicing for Fort Hays because Amber asked me first, and then a couple of people slipped into the calendar before this one, and I told them this is just a dry run for when I get to Kansas. I think I've maybe worked out the kinks. The third time's the charm. In Nevada, it was terrible. Don't worry about it. You didn't miss anything. So, the funny part of the evening is unfortunately over for the stories that I go into about this tonight. We start with maybe this picture right here, which is, it is part of this history. This is what Treblinka looks like today. There is nothing left of the camp itself. We're going to see the one known picture of the Treblinka revolt, which is coming toward the end of my talk tonight. But this is all that remains, and it is part and parcel of that history of resistance. They burned the camp as they ran out of the camp that day, and how they were able to do that is even part of this story. So one of the reasons we don't know so much about resistance at Treblinka today is the fact that it doesn't have that camp look. People don't visit it as much. People don't participate in history work or memory work about this place nearly as much as something like an Auschwitz. What we have there is a field of 17,000 stones. And each one of those stones, except for one, represents a whole city or town. They are in various different shapes and sizes to sort of represent the cracked and broken nature of the Jewish past of Poland and the varying sizes of the towns they recognize. Most of them aren't inscribed at all, but some of them just randomly have the name of a whole town on them. The single largest one in the middle there represents Warsaw, which was the single largest amount of people sent to Treblinka were sent there from Warsaw. And then there is the sign to the side there that says never again in many different languages. And there is one sign that recognizes a person, a single person. And it is a sign right over here. It's facing away from you, so you won't be able to see it, but it's right in there. And it honors Dr. Janusz Korczak, who was born Heinrich Goldschmidt. Janusz Korczak was the leader of a Jewish orphanage inside the Warsaw Ghetto. He was an individual who had devoted his life to sort of training children and being a teacher, and you could even very much say that he was like Poland's Mr. Rogers. He was very, very well known in and outside of the Jewish community. So he was offered even a way out of the Warsaw Ghetto. People offered to save him, to bring him out, to hide him. And he said no, that he wouldn't leave his orphans. And there is testimonial evidence of him going to Treblinka with them because he refused to leave them at their last moments. He knew it was coming, but he went with them. And because of that story, it was thought when they built this memorial that he was the one person that they would recognize with his own name on a stone. So he is that person. So try to begin something this gigantic. This is a story about the murder of 925,000 people. But try to begin it with some human faces. So I start with these two people. So right here you have what we believe to be, and that's how fragmentary this history can be at times, you have who we believe to be Alfred Galewski in a pre-war skiing trip picture. Alfred Galewski is a person who was sent to Treblinka early on by the Nazis. He ends up becoming a prisoner leader. He's appointed the highest ranking prisoner by the Germans. So he will assign work details, do various things to keep the guards happy, and he's sort of like in charge of the camp. But what's very different at Treblinka, you may have seen movies or read books that sort of talk about capos or other prisoner leaders as bad or difficult for prisoners to deal with. At Treblinka, that rule, if it even is firm anywhere else, is really set aside, and prisoner leaders are in on the resistance almost from the beginning. And we have on the right-hand side here, Samuel Reisman. And Samuel Reisman and Alfred Galewski knew each other because both had daughters who attended the same underground school in the Warsaw Ghetto. It was illegal to have schools in the ghetto. It was illegal to school your children. Nazis were trying to make sure that there wasn't a Jewish future in any way, shape, or form, but people wouldn't even give up the idea of schooling their children, so they founded underground schools, and these two men met because they had daughters in the same one of these schools. Galewski's already at Treblinka. He's there, standing inside the camp, working as a facilitator for the guards while a train is being unloaded, and he notices Samuel Reisman getting off the train, and he turns to the guard and says, you should pull him aside, bring him into the camp workforce. He can fulfill some of the jobs that you've been needing done. Reisman's wife and children go to the gas chamber, and they're murdered that very day. And later on that night in the barracks, because the guards would just shut and lock the barracks, they didn't patrol it at night, they just thought fenced barracks, good enough, done. Reisman comes up to Galevsky and basically like accosts him, probably grabs him by the clothes is what some people described it, and he screams at him, "Why did you save me? Why did you keep me alive in this place? My wife and children are dead. I don't have any reason to be alive anymore. Why did you make me live in here?" And he said to him something that reveals our first step in putting together resistance. He said, "I didn't save you to keep you alive in this hell. I saved you to sell your life at a higher price. You are now a member of a resistance group and you must live to fight." And he tells us in so many words that he's picking people off those trains to help put together a resistance. So early resistance at Treblinka, some people are pie in the sky thinking about revolt from the very first minute, but not everyone. The early best chances at resistance are actually escape, people trying to set up either individual, duo, or small group escapes. The camp is not well run. Someday I'm going to write a book or an article about the propaganda we still believe, and one of the propagandas that we still accidentally believe is that the Nazis were good at everything that they did. Many things that they did, they were terrible at, including also being guards of a camp. The guards of this camp were drawn from the euthanasia program, where they had been killing Germany's disabled people. They were actually trained nurses and hospital orderlies. They were not trained guards, and they didn't really know how to do it. So a lot of people escaped in the early days of the camp. This is where I first get you into some of the geography of the camp as well, and I just have to play favorites on which side of the audience I want to help the most. So I'll switch back and forth, but what we get here is the early view of the camp. This is what it looked like in its early months. It will get built out quite a bit more, but in this early days of the camp, most of the camp prisoners lived right here, and the privileged ones, the ones who had jobs that the Nazis thought meant they were more necessary and they could not be killed, they had to be kept alive in the camp to fulfill their function, they lived here, fence around it, smaller building. They can't communicate with each other. They can't get together. They can't even form bonds between each other. There's no time for them to talk. It's very much, if we separate it out from the terrible things that they're doing, we have to think about this place like it's a prison, where you as a prisoner are allowed to be where you sleep, you're allowed to be where you work, and you're allowed to be moving between those two places at the right time of day. Anything else could be lethal. So if you want to bring together an understanding of the whole camp, you need networks for that. You need to build bonds of trust between people. If I need to get over there to get a tool or something that would help in resistance, I can't just walk there myself. I need to know someone who's allowed to walk over there. So that's what they're doing initially. They're trying to build a resistance network, but in the early days, especially for the idea of escape. So we have on this screen a couple of the people that I'll point out to you as examples of what's going on here. In the top right-hand corner there, excuse me, you have Abraham Szepicki, who is in an older photo like that because he escapes Treblinka. He's quite a resistance guy. He escapes Treblinka but goes back to the Warsaw Ghetto and ends up fighting in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising and dying there, unfortunately. But Abraham Szepicki was in Treblinka for a while. He goes back to Warsaw and he tells people what it was. That was his whole idea of resistance. So the early phases of resistance at this place, and thankfully he recorded his testimony and it ended up in the underground archive of the Warsaw Ghetto, Oneg Shabbat. The early phases, the idea of resistance was get out, warn the world, then people will stop getting on the train, because they kept telling people, you're getting on the train to go east, you're going to be given a new job, this is just a transit thing, don't worry about it. So they needed to get people to understand what Treblinka really was, and these guys are participating in that early version of resistance while they still can't communicate with everybody inside the camp to bring together a revolt. This other man down here is Abraham Bamba, the one who's sitting in the, doing the barbering work. Maybe there are people in the crowd who recognize what that is a screenshot from. A man named Claude Lanzmann, a French documentarian, did a film called Shoah, which is a 9-hour-long documentary about the Holocaust. And in that documentary, he put Abraham Bamba back in the role of being a barber, because Abraham Bamba's job inside Treblinka was to work in this building right here, in this gray area, as the individual who had the terrible job of shaving women's heads before they went to the gas chamber. And Claude Lanzmann actually made him be a barber again for the film. But he's another escapee. He was in Treblinka for 18 days, and he gets out and he's able to tell people, don't go there. But eventually, the circumstances of the camp are going to make resistance in the form of escape much more difficult, and the prisoners will notice this and turn toward other plans. So you can see in this one, I'll switch to over here to pointing things for this side of the crowd, you've got the camp much more built out now. It is always, always, always under construction, and that is part of what benefits the idea of resistance. They can use construction to their own devices, because who do you figure that the Nazis are making do the actual construction work? It's the Jewish prisoners. So they can use that to get to different places in the camp. But one of the things they do is, they being the guards, is they realize at some point this camp is leaking like crazy. People are escaping all the time. This is going to get bad for us. We have to stop the escapes. And what they end up doing is ending one problem, that is escape, by creating a massive new problem for themselves, which is going to be revolt. Because they move all the prisoners from living here to this new U-shaped barracks that the guards like to call the ghetto. And now they're all co-located, they're all co-housed. There's no longer any form of physical or mental barrier in between anybody inside this camp. You can't be a prominent prisoner, a so-called Hofjude, as is down here in the typed text. You can't be one of them living on this side of the building and thinking to yourself, I better not get involved in resistance. I've got an easier job in here. Let's just, keep your head down and stay alive. It doesn't work anymore. We're all now housed in the same place. They're all coming into the same network. And Kalman Teigmann here, who was the second to last revolt survivor to pass away, he noticed that very clearly in one of his testimonies that he gave. He said, when we, the other prisoner working groups, who had, by the way, lived there, just to say again, arrived in the ghetto barracks and met the Hofjuden, the so-called prominent prisoners who had long tenure and more privileges. They worked in the German quarters, they had access to all places. We knew that only with their assistance would we be able to accomplish anything, to go to a particular place, or to escape, or to carry out an armed revolt. He's telling us networks and geography all at once. It's not like a reading between the lines kind of thing at Treblinka sometimes. He's said it right for us. It's about getting from place to place, and it's about knowing the right people to get from place to place. It's a really just amazing, important quote for us. So once they are all together in the same barracks, we can start telling the story of men and women in planning a revolt. And one of the things he says down there, with access to the German quarters, he's talking about Jewish women. Jewish women were employed as the cleaners of the German quarters. The revolt at Treblinka takes place on August 2nd, 1943, a planned, deliberate day of revolt, planned because it was the day that the most German guards were away on leave. And the people who knew how to plan when the German guards would be away on leave were the women who were forced to clean their boots before they left. So that's your first point of women's involvement in this revolt. And it's also, if you notice how he says this, it's the first part of their being erased from that history. He never says women. He never says that word once. He just says we and our. He takes ownership, but not of whose story he's telling. And we're going to see a lot more of that. But if we can get everybody together, we're going to change the mindset. And one of the things that becomes immediately worrisome for prisoners who are planning this revolt is one of the outcomes of the mindset of prisoners changing. This is a sad fact, but up until this moment, when all prisoners are housed together and they start planning a real revolt and they start believing in the idea that they could burn this place down, men had been taking their lives every night in the barracks. Suicide was endemic at this place. So much so that the guards expected it. So then you start planning a resistance, and no one is taking their own life anymore because they start to see a light at the end of the tunnel. That's worrisome. Even the most unattentive guard can realize, why aren't our prisoners dying anymore? So with that, we get into sort of one of the next pieces of understanding this revolt. I'm going to set that piece aside for a second and go to how we build this network inside and pushing people out of the network. So the network is relationships between prisoners. It's just the historian's way of saying relationships between prisoners is saying this putting together social networks thing. So Alfred Galewski is still standing here on the arrival area, helping people come into the camp. My favorite story about him telling the guards that they need to pick a certain person because he's actually just trying to bring trusted individuals into the camp is that he actually tells the Germans, pick my friend Morton Mattel over here. He can be your translator. You've got all these new Jews arriving from different countries all over Balkan, Europe. You can't understand what they're saying. You need a translator. You need somebody to tell them where to go when they get off the train. Pick my friend Morton. Well, Morton Mattel only speaks Polish. He doesn't speak a single word of another language other than Polish. He doesn't even speak Yiddish, which means he can't even speak to most of the Jews inside of Treblinka. But the guards are paying so much attention that they don't realize that their translator occasionally stands next to people and goes, blah, 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 just to look like a translator. He doesn't even know how to do that job. But that is Alfred Galewski, just as the example of who is one of many ways that they were pulling in people they trusted from pre-war life. Just to put a really fine point on that before I move on to the next point, imagine you're in this deadly, dangerous place like Treblinka, and you're trying to figure out who you can trust. Trying to form new relationships inside of a place like this is probably near to impossible. So the idea of relying on relationships with folks that you knew before the war, sometimes literally from your own street or whatever, that's going to be so much more important than just going, oh yeah, I bunk next to this guy, I think I can trust him. You probably can't. You need to figure out another way to trust folks. So the other side of that coin is one of the things, part of my narrative is stuff that's been too difficult to talk about. And this is where we start really going down that road of things that are too difficult to talk about. If Jews were doing the selection, which I would contend they were bringing in the certain different people off of the trains. They were making sure that they could trust individuals who came into the camp workforce. The sort of seedy underside of that is that they were also killing those they didn't think they could trust inside the camp. So we have Samuel Willenberg here. This man was the last survivor of the Treblinka revolt. Obviously, I picked a young man picture of him. I just wanted to pick that picture of him because this man lived to be 96 years old and he had piercing blue eyes and he always looked like he could stare daggers through the back of your head. He just always had that look, and this is him at about the age he was inside of Treblinka. He was brought in because they knew someone at the arrival gate was working there and knew they could trust him, and they thought he could work as something of an enforcer. They were definitely not wrong about the enforcer part. He says in his book, later the group decided to execute the traitors, spies, informers among the inmates. The men of the underground achieved significant results in carrying out this task. The executions would be carried out cautiously, secretly, without arousing suspicion. The frequent cases of suicide among the prisoners helped camouflage the executions. He says it in so many words for us. So the guards might catch on that you're planning resistance because everybody has stopped taking their own lives, but not if you replace that with killing the informants. So this is not easy to talk about in so many ways. It's victims of the Holocaust conducting violence against other victims of the Holocaust. And I wouldn't even want to judge a person who maybe provided information to the guards. Lord knows why they did so. Maybe they were starving to death. Maybe they were trying to save the lives of these are mostly male prisoners, so maybe they're trying to save the lives of their wives and children. So many other reasons they may have informed at some point. But the other prisoners decided they had to act against them. It's difficult stuff to talk about. One of the reasons why we haven't learned about it up till now. So this is also another point of entry for women in this revolt. One of the Jewish camp doctors, one of the women people who was a doctor in this camp, was a woman named Dr. Irena, sometimes called Irka Levkovska, and she worked as a doctor inside the barracks building. She was allowed to do that because Alfred Galewski helped convince the guards they needed that. She participated in getting rid of the informants by drugging them so much that they looked ill and incapable of work, and then the Germans would do the rest. She was part of this. She did those things. But is that mentioned here? Again, we have a testimony that talks really of a woman's role in resistance, but she's not there. She hasn't been mentioned in that testimony again. It's a running thing about this camp. So we have selecting the right people into the revolt. We have the difficult, hard thing to talk about of getting the wrong people out or away from the idea of a revolt plan. Where do we go next? Gaining control of territory. Some of these things are, these stories that I'm about to tell you, they just amaze me so much that I kind of just geek out on them and can't stop but getting really proud of how they managed to do this. This top one here, if anybody knows any German, is the Pferdestall. The Pferdestall means horse barn. There were no horses there, but the building looked like a horse barn, so everybody called it that. It's right down here, number 31 in the bottom right-hand corner. The Pferdestall is where people would come in on trains, they'd be forced to strip nude, they'd go to the gas chamber and be murdered. Their clothing would be sorted, sent back to Germany, and we think probably most often given out to like bombed out families and etc. So that building is where that sorting is going on and where all that clothing is, and it becomes a node for resistance in some really fascinating ways. First, they make it the safe place that they can put sick and injured members of the resistance conspiracy. And the way we know this is so spellbinding to me. A man named Eddie Weinstein was shot in the armpit on the way to Treblinka. Somebody fired into the rail car he was in, and he got hit in the armpit, and he arrived at Treblinka unable to move his arm with a bullet wound to his armpit. But somebody who was a friend of his pulled him aside, saved him, stuck him into the Pferdestall, and he was safe there because the Nazis had long pushed a version of propaganda that said Jews are infested with lice and that lice will give you typhus. Jews are the carriers of disease. They said this all the time. They even put those sort of posters in Polish in their occupied Polish lands. You can find those posters anywhere you want. Just Google typhus posters. You'll come up with tons of them. The Germans actually believed this. This is their own propaganda that they had fallen into actually believing. So Alfred Galewski and other prisoners are like, oh, you know, this building is full of Jewish clothes. It's just chock-a-block with lice. Don't go in there. And the guards didn't. They never went in there. And they never went in there to such a point that a man who couldn't even move his arm was safe in there for 17 days. And so were many others that they were trying to get healthy and back on their feet so that they could participate in resistance. So if they were trying to save you for resistance, you went to the Pferdestall. If they were trying to make sure that you were nowhere near resistance, they left you in the barracks for the guards to do what they would do. And the people who move between the Pferdestall and the prisoner living quarters are, again, women. Women in the tailor's shop were allowed to go to the Pferdestall to pick up clothing material so that they could make luxury goods for the guards. So the women would not be suspect of resistance if they're moving between those two places. So all day during the day, they would have women moving back and forth to the Pferdestall, delivering messages about what the guards are up to the people hidden in that building. Amazing to me. They controlled space. They use networks to do it. They're taking over the camp piece by piece and using lies to the guards to do it, and the guards are believing it. The infirmary we kind of already covered. Irina Levkovska, Dr. Levkovska, can, if she wants, make sure someone leaves the camp through her work in the infirmary. In the SS barracks, we know that the women who had to clean the barracks, polish Germans' boots, prepare their luggage to go on leave, could keep track of their comings and goings and tell the conspirators when is the right day to revolt. And that's exactly what they did there. And finally, we get to the bottom one here, the armory. So the armory is this little teeny building named number 7. 6 and 6B are the barracks, the SS barracks, that is. I'll come over here and point at it again because it's tiny. So 7 is the armory. 6A and 6B are where the SS guards live. Really hard to get into the armory, right? If it's right in between two guards' barracks buildings, how are you ever going to get there? So the guards spend much of their time at Treblinka drinking themselves to sleep. One of the other things that Alfred Galevsky convinces them of is, it doesn't look very military bearing for you to just have empty liquor bottles all over around here all the time, every morning. You should let us assign some young boy to go clean that up. And the guards are like, that's a good idea. You should do that. Go clean that up. So they assign a boy to push a cart around, picking up these bottles, and as he's walking by the armory one day, he stops his cart, he walks over and he jabs a pin into the keyhole of the armory door. So next time you try to stick a key in there, it won't go in. And the guards do what they always do, and they order the Jews to remove the door from its hinges, take it over to the locksmith shop, which is right there inside the Jewish barracks. And the 2 Jewish locksmiths are ordered to create a new key. While they're creating that new key, they make themselves a spare. Pretty darn brilliant. You broke the lock, you move the door, you get the door brought to you, you make your own key, you put the door back on its hinges, but now you have a key to the armory. Well, that's great. But then how do you get near it on the day that you want to empty it out and use all the stuff that was in it, right? Being able to get a key to the door is fine, but if you can't walk anywhere near it, you can't do anything with it. So the next part of that ruse is recorded on the map, right here. These 2 things in front of that building are flower planters, but they stand about this tall. Like they're wooden box flower planters, like lifted gardens, kind of. I have a brown thumb. I have no idea what I'm talking about right now. But they're lifted boxes, and they sit right in front of the windows of the guards' barracks. Because, imagine for 1 second, and then push it out of your mind, how bad Treblinka smells. They're killing 6,000 people a day and burning them. It smells horrific. So the Jews come to the Germans and say, why don't you let us put some flower planters in front of your barracks and fill it with lupine so that the wind comes off of the lupine into your barracks and it doesn't smell so bad. And the Germans are like, wow, that's really nice of you. Fantastic idea. You should get on that. But by suggesting that to them, now they have the right to bring a construction cart right up in front of the armory door. So they can park right in front of that with a horse-drawn construction cart, big enough to block the door. And on the morning of the revolt, they show themselves in using their own key, having moved everybody to their assigned attack place in the camp by other lies to the guards, having kept alive members of their conspiracy right here in their own little hospital and planning room. And then they empty out all of the weapons from the armory there in Camp 1, and they hide them until it's time to distribute them to the rest of the prisoners in the camp. And they hide them by planting them in the kitchen. And why the kitchen? Because the kitchen is staffed by Jewish women who the guards continue to not suspect of the capability of resistance. So who's responsible for handing out the weapons and hand grenades and everything that had been stolen from the armory that day? Jewish women. standing there in the kitchen. You must walk up to the woman who you walk up to at lunch, and you must say life to her, and she responds death. And if the look on your face says that you know that you were supposed to get that response, she hands you a pistol and a hand grenade. That's how the distribution of firearms went for the revolt. You had to have, they used the very gendered geography of the camp kitchen right there, the fact that it wasn't suspected by the guards, and the trust they had in the women who were part of the conspiracy to conceal where they had gotten these weapons and how to disseminate them to everybody in the camp. So that's Camp 1. That's this side of the camp. I said to some of the students, this place is incredibly confusing, Treblinka I, Treblinka II, Camp 1, Camp 2. It's an absolute mess. But this is one side of the camp that's not allowed to communicate with this one. So if you're in this, you got armed by that whole story that I told you about the key. However, if you're on the other side of the camp, you are armed by something altogether really darker. There was at Treblinka a camp brothel. Nazis created a facility in the other side of Treblinka where the bodies were burned. There was a specific workforce that was held there. And they decided at one point to create a camp brothel on that side of the camp to serve the Ukrainian guards and the high-ranking Jewish prisoners of that side of the camp. Terrible to say, but think of it as them deciding that the work over there was so disgusting and so horrible that there had to be some sort of morale boost for the people forced to be there, and their decision on that was to create a camp brothel. Sources indicate this place really existed. They tell us a bit about who was in it. It was 13 women at most. On the day of the revolt, it seems to have been 8 that were working there. So people have long not talked about the fact that that brothel existed. The historian who wrote a book about this place before me actually had the exact same quote that I used to show that this did exist, but he stopped in his book with an ellipses, ... right before the part where it says there is a brothel in Treblinka. He didn't want to go there. We can throw him under the bus for that, and maybe we should, but one of the reasons, the more charitable reason of why he maybe didn't say anything about that, is because he was writing in the 1970s, when probably all of the women who had been forced to live in that place and work in that place were still alive, to be damaged all over again by the revelation that they had been forced to be in a place like that. So if we're being charitable to that other historian, that's probably why, or at least one of the reasons why he might have done that. He also might have just been a person who didn't think of that as the kind of history he wanted to tell. We know plenty of examples of that as well. I can't get into his mind, and I'm not going to try. Those are just 2 ways that we could explain that. But since he left it out, he also left out the ability to prove that there was a brothel. And if you can't prove that there was a brothel, you then can't use the other quote that he could have found as well, and probably did find, that says on the day of the revolt, the women in the brothel distracted the guards who had set down their rifles in the quote-unquote waiting room, and a Jewish man who was part of the conspiracy ran directly into the brothel, grabbed up those 8 rifles, and trucked it out of that building. He gets shot in the back and killed, but the 8 rifles are out. They're grabbed up and thrown into the resistance. Before we knew this at all, we didn't know really how resistance in this separate Camp 2 area of Treblinka was armed. It never made sense. It was always like, well, okay, that's how they got weapons in Camp 1, but how did they get weapons in Camp 2? It just never clicked until we reveal the existence of the brothel, and then we reveal how it participated in resistance. I'm bringing that up to say, this is not like prurient interest. It's not just to tell a terrible story for no reason or to unmask something that maybe many might have wanted to remain unspoken. Speaking it recovers the agency of the people who were forced to be in it. And there are women who survived Treblinka. These are 2 of them. This is a DVD of a survivor meeting held in Tel Aviv in the year 2000 that was provided to me by one of the 6 people that was around the table. And there were 2 women survivors at that table. There are only 2 named women survivors of the revolt. There are more women who survived the revolt, but like, as for the reasons you've just heard, several of them probably never came forward. Part of that never coming forward, though, we know who they are. This is Sonia Levkovich, close to the one the last name I've been saying to you, but different person. Sonia Levkovich and Bronka Sukno. We know their names. We don't know entirely what they endured in the camp. They'd tell what they wanted to and then walk back from other possible stories. But they would also come to a reunion and talk to their fellow survivors, but they never had any need to talk to the outside world. They left that to the men. So the telling of the story of Treblinka became a very male telling of the story of Treblinka. And one might assume, and I think should, that that's because of the ways they might have been questioned by the outside world. If they had come forward and said that they had survived Treblinka as well and gave testimony in public, people would ask and did, though it's such a sad, terrible thing that people would ask this. A woman would say, well, I survived this camp as well. Whoa, really? How did you? Never any value judgment of a man's survival experience. But there were quite often times where there were value judgments of a woman's survival experience. How did you make it through? What did you have to give to do that? Terrible questions asked later on. So they may have just avoided having those kind of confrontations. We also have the issue of what men would say and when they would say it. So we have 3 really good examples here. We have Jonas Kornhändler is a person who escaped Treblinka and was in the camp for only about 10 days. He tells you directly, even in an oral history interview, he's asked, were there any women in the camp? And he says, yeah, I knew them. They worked here. They did these kind of things. They were around. They were really important. He was only there for 10 days. He maybe doesn't have as many scars about what he saw. Others are not so forthcoming. This is Abraham Bamba, later in life than when he was sitting by that barber chair for Claude Lanzmann's documentary. And his oral history interviewer says to him directly, and this is also really rare, where you as a historian want to hear all these stories and you're waiting for them to ask the question you're interested in, and usually they just don't even ask it. This oral history interviewer says, were there any women in the camp? And I named one of the chapters of my book after this. He responds, and I quote, there was no women there. And you're like, what? We can look at his life, where he lived, where he slept, where he had to get his meals, and we can reconstruct that he had to see women at least 5 times a day, that it would be impossible for him to have lived in Treblinka without seeing them. So he says directly to his oral history interviewer, there was no women there. 3 minutes later, he tells a story about knowing 2 women who survived Treblinka who live in Israel. Real nice ladies, I met them, had dinner once. Head explodes, like how is this possible? How have we gone 3 minutes further into the interview? No, they didn't exist. Oh yeah, I knew them. Cognitive dissonance. He has buried something he doesn't want to talk about. The easiest way for him to not get into a conversation about what women endured at Treblinka is to not have them present. So when the line of questioning is, were there women at Treblinka, with the logical next question being, what did they go through? He just goes, no, they weren't there. Then when he wants to tell you a post-war story about some nice ladies he met in Jerusalem, they reappear. So we deal with that in testimony all the time. Edek Stein, on the end there, the other great example of what we deal with in testimony. Edek Stein is an example of when the rules evidently went out the window on the oral history interviewing process. You were supposed to, back then, interview the survivor by themselves, you, the videographer, the interviewee, nobody else. He's got the whole family on the other side of the camera. And he's asked at one point, did you know any women during the Holocaust? What did they endure? And he looks, and I screen grabbed right at the moment he's doing it, his head stops 5 times as he looks to the 5 people in his audience, and he says to his interviewer, "I don't want to say that here in front of these girls." "Which girls?" "These girls here." And the interviewer says, "Don't worry about them." He says, "No, it's too drastic." He changes the subject and goes on. He never tells that story because he's worried about 2 things: re-injuring himself by telling those stories, because he's the male protector who is unable to protect, and by re-injuring the presumably young women, probably his daughters or granddaughters, who have been allowed into the interview. The story goes on, never having told that story. Oral histories are often like that. Last point here, the same men can be very forthcoming in their memoir. You know, the written page doesn't keep you from writing. The white piece of paper doesn't tell you that's ugly to say. You can just say it. So the writings that they put on paper right after the war tend to be way more upfront with what's going on than what they'll say to an interviewer a good 40, 50 years later usually. So that we have a problem putting things together for those reasons. But you came here for a story of a revolt, so we'll wrap up on a story of a revolt. What happened that day? I get to tell you one more thing that I think is my favorite part of their resistance conspiracy. So again, leaning into the idea that Jews are infested with disease and the Nazis believe this, they asked the guards, this whole camp is populated by Jews. It's obviously going to have infestations. You should allow us to spray down the buildings every day. And the Germans are like, that's a great idea. Here's a backpack sprayer, why don't you do that? So they do, kind of lulling them into a false sense of security. One man's job is to walk around every day, all day long, pumping a soapy water solution onto the buildings. On the day of the revolt, he switches out the soapy water for kerosene. He walks around the whole camp spraying it down in kerosene. Perfectly logical question you might have in your mind is, how do you not notice the difference between kerosene and soapy water? Just for a moment, remember how bad Treblinka smells. So probably couldn't catch up on that. So the whole camp has been hosed down in kerosene. Well done. Weapons are spirited out of the armory down here, moved over to the kitchen, staged with the women who will store them there. The prisoners go to their various staging areas. Basically, Galevsky spends all day long lying to the Germans. He even sends his so-called translator to work with the lumber cutters. He goes, I don't need anything translated today. You should let me send him over here. But over here is just strategically closer to the gate. So they move all the prisoners where they're supposed to go. The revolt is supposed to begin at 4 p.m. The prisoners make a very emotional decision at the early part of the day. They decide no more Jews are going to die today. If they try to kill anybody before the revolt is supposed to happen, we started early. We're going to go out in a blaze of glory, but we're not going to let them have anybody else. And about 2 hours before the revolt is supposed to happen, somebody got caught carrying cash because it was totally against the rules to carry cash. But everybody who was going to participate in the revolt on the day of the revolt was loaded down with gold and jewelry and Polish money because they're about to be on the run, so they know they're going to have to pay for food and everything. And they're taking all this money off of the people who've been brought to Treblinka, so they are loaded. Guard catches 2 of them. He's about to march them to a point of execution. They shoot the guard. The revolt has begun. But it's begun 2 hours early. Not everybody's in the right place. Not everybody's armed yet. But the signal is enough. The man who grabs those weapons, goes into the brothel, grabs up those 8 weapons, runs them out into the resistance area. The whole thing just becomes complete disorganized chaos. There was a plan. The plan is out the window, and everyone is just running for the nearest fence, shooting as much as they possibly can on their way there. They make it out through that gate, and through a hole busted in the fence right next to, this is the brothel. So they make it right out behind that brothel building. It's another reason I think it's a very important part of the revolt. Where did they get all these weapons, and then which part of the fence do they actually use? It's right there. It's really a part of this story. We have one picture of that day. A Polish railway worker named Franciszek Żebecki, who was also a member of the underground, snapped this picture of Treblinka because smoke often came out of Treblinka, but not jet black, acrid looking smoke from, mind you, maybe a kerosene fire that is burning down every building in the camp. So I think that just, yeah, it's a black and white picture, but you can tell it's black smoke, right? So I think that's even evidence that this spraying down the buildings and kerosene thing really did happen. That's where they go. That's our one picture. They escape into the fields and forests beyond. Probably about 300 Jews make it out alive that day. Probably about 300 are killed in the process of the revolt. And precisely, weirdly, 105 remain alive, trapped inside the camp at the end of the day. But those 300 or so become sort of the nucleus of who can tell this story and why we know anything about what went on in here. They survive, they tell the story, they go everywhere they can to tell the story. These people are like have trial, will travel. They will go anywhere you hold a trial. There have been trials in Indiana, in Upper Michigan, I think it was, Florida, Ukraine, Austria, Germany, and Israel. And they have shown up for every single one of them in the years before they've all now passed away. And they convict 93% of their guards, which is out of all proportion to other camps. They don't get prison sentences that would make you anywhere near happy, but they do get convicted, and in the process, a record of what actually happened there is created. And we end up with, at this point, 262 named survivors of Treblinka who can still tell this story and really are all of the stories that I've been able to tell you today. So that's what I have for you, and thanks so much for listening.
So I'm going to facilitate questions, and I forgot to warn you in advance. If you could, you have a sheet next to you, write down questions, and we have students that will come grab them. And then maybe we have something online that we could take while we do that. We do not. All right. So I will produce a question from my brain, something brilliant.
All right.
Like, how does your work really fundamentally change the way that historians think about and address Treblinka?
So the big things that I'm trying to add here are, well, it's kind of started in the end and the beginning. Before my work, this book in the top right corner here by Alexander Donat named 67 survivors of Treblinka. So getting that number up to 262 is a huge amount more witnesses that can tell you new stories that maybe we'd never heard before, never focused on before. And about 100 pages of my book are just all of their names and all the sources that you can go find them yourself, and really just you can go look. I'm hoping that people will go look for new histories that they can tell with these new sources. Because the first thing that I was told when I said I wanted to do research on Treblinka was, you can't do research on that place, there wasn't enough survivors of it, you won't find enough sources. So I'm trying to show you can do that. That's like the end and the beginning there, but like what I'm happiest about or proudest of as a thing that changes in this is that the entire published life of this camp up till when I wrote, there were literally 5 whole pages on women at Treblinka. 5. A chapter called Women Prisoners was 5 pages long, and that was it. So restoring them and everything that they did to the record has been, I guess I hope it's okay to admit it as a historian, but my most prideful thing about doing this work is putting them back into this story. Yeah, I show a lot of more terrible things that they went through, but I do it just to show their reality and how they used those terrible things to contribute to resistance. So those are my favorite parts, I think.
It sounds like a lot of people in the audience have very similar types of questions. But one of the ones that really stood out to me here is often in Holocaust history, especially older Holocaust history, there's this mythology that Jews went like sheep to the slaughter.
Yeah.
And there's that famous Kovner, like, do not go like lambs to the slaughter, right?
Yep.
So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how we as scholars, as active community members, can use this story and others to really combat that
Yeah.
particular myth.
So, I would love this book to not be about the revolt. The strange thing is, like, they resisted in every single way you could imagine way before August 2nd, 1943. They resisted in every single imaginable capacity, keeping each other alive, telling little lies that allows Eddie Weinstein to stay in that barracks building for 17 days with a bullet wound, lifting each other up in moments that they had totally lost all ability to go on. And even the father of a man who later became chief rabbi of Israel was a victim of Treblinka. He arrived at Treblinka. He was a rabbi also himself. He arrives at Treblinka along with his congregation. He knows what Treblinka is. He's not under any false impressions. Jews have a prayer called Vidoy, which maps decently onto the idea of last rites. And he is standing there with his congregation getting off the train, and he doesn't try to do some crazy thing like resist at the last minute or anything. He knows that they're all going to die. So he pulls out his prayer book and he begins to chant Vidoy, and he takes his congregation to the gas chamber, leading them in Vidoy. He's saying, you hate me because I'm Jewish, but I'm going to die a Jew, and there's nothing you can do about that. I'm going to be who I am until I leave this earth. And he does it that way. And there's so many other amazing examples. There's a woman who steps off the train with a hand grenade and gives the nearest guard a hug, both gone. There's a woman who steps off the train with a razor blade and nearly amputates a guard's whole arm in how hard she attacked him. People are resisting at this place constantly. The whole camp, I could even go into, and the book does. The whole camp is even designed because of resistance. Like, you're funneled into this little waiting area behind all these fences. Richard Glazar calls his memoir of the camp Trapped with a Green Fence, because they wove branches through the fence so you couldn't see through it and it always looked green. The procedures of how they're gassing people are designed to lull them into a false sense of security and stop them from resisting. If Jews weren't resisting, the camp would look nothing like the way that it does. But it is entirely built because they keep stepping off a train and blowing somebody up, shooting them, slicing them up, all the things that they're doing, and caring for each other. I'm as impressed by the rabbi reciting Vidoy as I am by stepping off the train with a hand grenade. I think they're both the same act. Maybe I'll end this by saying one of the things that I tell my students a lot, or I talk with my students about, and they get to this on their own, I shouldn't take the credit from them. Resistance doesn't have to mean you succeed. It just means that you set your own terms. Like, if you're resisting Nazism as a Jew in Central Europe in 1943, you may not make it to the end, but if you determine your own path and maybe the manner of your own end, that's still resistance.
So one of our teachers who's currently with student detention would like to know if you found any evidence that the guards at Treblinka made that connection with the fewer suicides, fewer people dying. Did they connect that to resistance? Did they notice anything going on?
We don't have them in their own words, but we have the prisoners worrying about it constantly. Several different sources talking about they're gonna catch on, they're gonna realize it. And one guard in particular, there's 30 Germans and 120 conscripted Hilfswillige volunteers there's Slavic volunteers captured from the Red Army. So these 30 Germans, 29 of them, let's say, are individuals who came from the euthanasia program. One of them is a former prison guard, and they're really worried that he's going to be the one who catches on. They even mention him by name. They're like, this guy is going to realize we're not killing ourselves anymore, and they're going to figure it out. or that everybody is walking around with a little bit more pep in their step because they think they're about to burn the camp down. So not the guards, but yes, from the prisoners. There's one structural reason that the guards rarely ever say anything about like individual prisoner agency or things that prisoners do. The guards, for the most part, are tried in German courts, and German courts require you to prove motive to like prove the crime of murder. So it's manslaughter if you don't prove that I also did it out of hatred. And one of the easier ways to prove that I did it out of hatred is to prove any of my beliefs about Jews. So they won't ever talk about individual Jews, because it sort of accidentally opens the door toward motive and getting them convicted of a higher crime. So they will talk in the abstract about people, but never about Jews.
I kind of love this question because it's one we all struggle with.
All right.
How do you decide when to stop researching and start writing?
When I ran out of fellowship support and needed to complete a dissertation. No, it's a short book, by the way. It's 120 pages. So I stopped earlier than most people do. So what I thought, and I think I would still do this in my projects, is what is the story I want to tell? The story I wanted to tell was resistance and revolt, backstory of the revolt all the way up to the revolt, done. And a lot of people were like, oh, you could also tell their lives after, what happened after August 2nd, how did they survive? Because August 2nd, 1943 is 21 months until the end of the war. Those 300 people have to try to make it another 21 months before they can tell you about what happened in Treblinka and make it to safety. A lot of people were like, oh, you should expand into that. That's still resistance. I'm like, yeah, it is, but it's not resistance at Treblinka. So I resisted that and I said no, and I'm saving it for the second book project. But I really dug in my heels about this is the story I want to tell. Put a boundary around that story and not expand beyond it. A lot of people had good ideas. I had to say no to people who had all the power, like PhD advisors. They're a god. So like telling them no, you're not going further than that is really, really hard. But I kept doing it because I think it's the way the story should have been told.
All right, I will do one more, and then I have kind of a really fun closing question that somebody gave us.
Okay.
So is there one person or story that you would want to see building another book around?
Oh. It's a tie. This is Richard Glazar, the one on the bottom here. Fantastically brilliant man. He was a trained public engineer, so he drew the camp, and one of the reasons we know what it looked like so well is that this guy was a trained engineer and then sat down to draw the camp. He also recalls it with such care. He includes people's names. He doesn't just be like, oh, this guy came up to me in the camp. He records everybody's name. He's an incredible person, and he lived a difficult life too. Much like some other prominent Holocaust survivors, he kind of after the war lived for his wife. He and his wife were attached at the hip. She passed on, and he took his own life thereafter. And I'm really drawn to that story because he's still, I think, my way of understanding his life is that he even then wanted to be able to be the one who determined the way in which he went out. He wanted to set those terms himself. So he utterly fascinates me. He's a hero of mine. And so is Samuel Willenberg there. This is Samuel Willenberg. And if I can go back to here, this is the book cover. And the book cover is one of those where if you laid it flat, the image goes all the way around. This is a statue created by Samuel Willenberg. I can write, but I can't do anything else. I'm terrible at everything else in life, just absolutely everything. Samuel Willenberg, everything he ever touched, he was fantastic at. everything. He decided at one point when he was in his 70s that the way he was going to finally process having been in Treblinka was to become a sculptor. He'd never done it. But he just makes himself into a sculptor, and he sculpts about 20 statues of life inside Treblinka. And this is the one he calls Revolt. And the statue is about that long and very narrow, and I just put it all the way around the bottom of my book. He says this is him, so I wanted him on the cover too. He deserves a biography. I don't know if I can write a biography, but I might be tempted to give it a shot at some point. But.
So to kind of, do you have anything else on mind? So closing question, what are the top 2 to 3, or if you have them, findings that we can apply to our world today as we consider change, movements, and resistance?
Yeah. Resistance is about who you know, not what you know. There, really good Holocaust historians have ruled out the idea of there being a resistance personality. Everybody resists. It's about timing and opportunity. Some of the mousiest people you've ever met in your life will end up be the ones that sets the camp on fire. Some of the people who looked the toughest you've ever seen crumple. It's not a personality. That wasn't my work. There's really good scholarship on that. It's an opportunity, seeing the moment and then seizing it. And it seems to be, here's a lesson for today, I think. If like you've never been one to be a part of a resistance or a protest or something like that, the very first time you do it seems to be like the opening of the door. Like there's several survivors of Treblinka who survived like 6 different camps. Because once they escaped one time, that's all they were ever looking for again, was they always had their eye open for the moment you could possibly escape. There's one guy who, I think his story is somewhat funny because of how he renamed himself. He kind of spent the rest of his life trying to escape. So he called himself Thaddeus Stabholz after the war because he was like, what's the Goyishest name I could possibly come up with? And he goes with Thaddeus Stabholz. No one ever thought he was Jewish with that name ever again. So Thaddeus wrote a book called 7 Hells because he escaped from 7 camps. They kept catching him. Maybe he wasn't good at that part. But like, they couldn't keep him. He was like the great escape. It was like Steve McQueen just making it out of, like, maybe we should make a movie about his life. But I bring him up in your question about resistance because what I think the good scholarship shows is not a personality, but once you find the first opportunity and you light the fire yourself the first time, it seems like you're always looking for it thereafter, or at least the people I've read about and know, that's how they were doing it. That was what mattered. They were of all different backgrounds, men, women, young, old, strong, weak, intellectual, blue collar, all of the above. Persons in the resistance ranged from a professor of physics to a street thug, like a guy who just made his money in the Warsaw Ghetto by beating people up. Like every different kind of person you could possibly imagine. It was opportunity, seeing it the first time, and then just making it into a personality trait where you're always looking for it.
Well, if you want to thank me, or thank Dr. Gibbs once again, that was good.
Thank you.
Oh, if
I'll
you want
thank
to
you.
thank me.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to take this moment to thank everybody for attending our events this month as we talked about resistance, and encourage you to take away from this talk and all of our events this month that whenever you see injustice in the world, you can speak out or you can do something. Chad can take individual questions a little bit on the side, but we
Sure.
do have a dinner to get to, so if you want to ask one, you better run. And hopefully, I know this will continue next year. You attend the Holocaust Remembrance and Education events next year here at Fort Hays and at the Hays Public Library.
And just one more thanks to the organizers, to Amber, to Holly, to the college, and all of you for coming. Thanks so much.